Welcome to the 4TLOTG podcast with your hosts, Jefferson Belfort and Brian Hernandez. Brian, how you doing today?
I am doing pretty great. I mean, it's kind of crazy just looking at the date of it's already the end of January of 2022. Like, time has been going by so fast. We're already about to be at the trade deadline by next week. So I am pumped. I'm ready. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm feeling really, really good. Honestly, like you mentioned, the fact that we're getting closer and closer to February, days within February, just speaks to a good time in the season where all the NBA teams are going through a frenzy, trying to figure out which players are they going to keep, which players are going to move on with. And that should be fun to talk about and see. And honestly, it's the propelling conversation of the agenda for today. So,
Yep.
Let me get right to it. So the agenda for today is, first we'll go on with the troubles in paradise with James Harden for Brooklyn Nets right now. Donovan Mitchell and some recent rumors. CJ trade, is it imminent? And then Andrew Wiggins and his all-star starting role. And lastly, the Knicks are actively looking for a point guard to add to this team. Are you ready, Ryan?
Let's do it.
All right, perfect. So let's start off with the James Harden situation. So offline, me and Brian were talking about James Harden a little bit, and you're saying some stuff that I think makes a lot of sense. Is James Harden's rounding back up into shape, first, and then he's also rounding up into his style of play as well too. But that is not stopping James Harden from being frustrated with the current situation he's in right now. And he first is still dealing with lingering issues from his hamstring injury. Second, he's undermanned. The team is undermanned. The expectation of what the roster was supposed to look like does not look like that currently as we sit in January 29th. But there's hopes that, players will come back, right? But that's affecting him also. And then the external is the Sixers knocking on the door, trying to see if there's realistically a way that they could acquire James Harden. League executives started speaking that they believe that a trade will be facilitated between Harden and the Sixers potentially in the offseason, and that was reported by Chris Haynes. He later went on to report also that the teams around the NBA are considering that they should investigate the situation because it's starting to feel like there is conversations that should not be happening with organization and owner and GM between James Harden and James Harden and the Philadelphia Sixers. So putting all of those things together has presented us with this cluster of craziness that we're dealing with James Harden right now. And honestly, it begs the question of, does James Harden, even when offered the Supermax this summer, does he take it? Does he ask for a reduced deal? something similar to what LeBron James does, a 1 or 2 year deal. Kawhi Leonard as well does that, just so he can leave his options open and go from there. So, what do you think, Brian?
It's this whole situation is pretty fascinating to me, mainly because of like I guess you can kind of see these seeds were being planted in the beginning of the season when you got KD sign his extension, and then what did Kyrie never sign his, and there was a little like stoppage there. James Harden also like they were talking about it. It's like, oh, we'll worry about it when it happens, but like this has kind of been like, I guess now that we're seeing a little more light into the situation and kind of what's happening there. Like James Harden just wanted to keep his options open. And now throughout the season, like you mentioned, there's the frustrations, the whole Chris Haynes thing. I like some of the stuff that I found was pretty interesting of like you mentioned, there's a relationship between James Harden and Daryl Morey, because Daryl Morey was the GM of the Rockets when James Harden was there. He made the trade for James Harden. He pretty much spent that entire time trying to build around James Harden. And it didn't work out. They got pretty close a few times, but there's a trust there between those two guys. And then there's minority owner of the Philadelphia 76ers, Michael Rubin, who's like really close with James Harden. And the quote that we have here from Haynes is like, there's another player we're going to add to this dynamic, Michael Rubin. For those that don't know, Sixers owner is a very, very good friends with James Harden, and I've been talking to a rival owner, talking to rival front offices, and we believe that there's some talks going on right now between both sides. So also, for the listeners that don't know, that's not supposed to happen right now. Which, I mean, we talked about it before in the past with like the Lonzo Ball stuff and everything, like this last offseason. These conversations are happening all the time. You just can't get caught. And right now, with all the reports coming out and everything, it's looking like they're going to get caught. And there's already it's pretty interesting with the rules of in terms of when the league actually does investigations for these things. They only are allowed to do it when another team complains and when another team files a complaint to the NBA. So this happened as well when the report I was looking at was saying about like 2013 when Andrei Karolinko went to the Nets, and there was like, oh, the new Russian owner and all this other stuff, and now you got this Russian player taking a super cheap deal, and like people complain, they investigated it, the NBA cleared it. But now this is really looking like a situation where maybe this could happen. This option's also there. The biggest thing to realize though is that James Harden, or not James Harden, the Nets have pretty much all the flexibility here, because the only way James Harden actually goes to the Philadelphia 76ers is if by sign and trade. So just because the Sixers are completely capped out with Embiid and Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris all on max contracts, there's no room for another max contract guy. So the only way this happens is sign and trade. But it's pretty interesting. So Jeff, do you actually think there's a possibility he leaves?
I think that possibility of him leaving is as big as the chances of me getting with Zendaya, because I wanna be honest. I really don't see a way where he, a year after making the decision to come to Brooklyn and was pitted with those two teams, chooses to go back on that. I do understand the relationship, and I do understand, and you'd be naive to not acknowledge that he has a working relationship with Daryl Morey, but he has a friendship with it's not Rick Rubin, but it's I forgot his first name, Michael Rubin.
Michael.
Michael Rubin. Rick Rubin's hip hop, but yeah, like he has a friendship with Michael Rubin. You will see in the off season Michael Rubin's having a party You'll see Meeks there. You'll see James Harden's there. So I understand why people could see that or perceive that as he's heading towards that. But when you stack it all up and you look at situations, if James Harden's mindset right now is to win a championship, is to get as far as winning the championship, his better bet is going off of playing with Kevin Durant, and even if it's halftime, half of the time with Kyrie Irving. Then go to the Sixers, which I honestly, the trade actually does go down. They're arguably up there as the best duo in the league because it kind of mirrors what the Lakers did with LeBron James and AD, but obviously they're having injury issues, advanced age. That's changing the dynamic a little bit. This looks like that would look like a younger version of that, right? But at what cost? At what cost is it going to be? I think that the Nets, if they actually engage in that type of trade, you're not seeing Maxey on the team anymore. You're not seeing Seth Curry on the team anymore. Well, apparently they want to throw Tobias Harris, but no one's taking that. But he might stay on the team. What team are you going to have around them at that point? And the real question that comes from that too is how much better do you make the Nets when you make that trade? Yes, you get the better player for the longevity of his current contract, right? Or whatever length of the contract they give him, right? But Nets have better pieces that fit the guys that are their stars at that point too. So I don't know. I would be very cautious if I was the Sixers. It really does feel like they're just supplanting stories, rumors into the news just so they could push the narrative to one way. And obviously there has to be some realness to it. But I think it's a pipe dream. It really is a pipe dream.
Yeah, I wonder if this is like a kind of situation where the Sixers are trying to drive some urgency of hey, if you want Ben Simmons, you have to do it now, because if you don't do it now, then he's probably going to be involved in this Nets trade for James Harden and all that. So maybe trying to drive some urgency there. What kind of doesn't make sense to me is right now James Harden is frustrated because of all the injuries and all this other stuff. Sure, that's fine. I can understand that. But to tell me that you're going to go to the Sixers and play with another injury-prone star in Embiid, that Embiid has always been pretty fantastic, and when he's healthy, he is one of the best players. Now you're going to go to play with him, who's not very healthy as well, and it's it just kind of doesn't really make too much sense. In that end, I'm kind of on your side. I feel like this is more maybe a 10, maybe 15% chance of this actually being something. But I think for the most part, this is just kind of a fun story. We'll see how this progresses. But I don't really think there's much here. Like you're saying too, with if they end up trading, if this is a sign and trade kind of stuff, the Sixers aren't going to be left with much more afterwards. And now you don't have a lot of flexibility. You have injury prone guys, and it's a complete mess. So yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on this James Harden stuff at the moment.
So to finish it up, summer does come this offseason. You think the Nets are going to be more prone to giving him that flexibility in the years when making the decision? Or are they going to try to secure him for a similar deal as Kevin Durant and lock him up for the long term?
I would assume that the Nets would want to do the more long-term thing. But I'd assume James Harden would probably want flexibility, and they're just gonna end up of giving him that flexibility. That's my assumption. Just because the star has so much power in these types of extensions here, that, and especially too, like James Harden is the type of player that he can kind of get that super max whenever he wants. And it's like when he's kind of like what Chris Paul did, like when you're 35, you can sign that super max and you can have until you're 39 or whatever, or 40, and people will be fine with that just because of how good you still going to be. So that's where my thoughts are. What do you think?
I think I agree with what you're saying, but I will add what I think mindset for the Nets should be differently. But I think
Yeah.
you are right that they're going to think about the long term. But I would shift the mindset to giving him a shorter term of contracts because and it really doesn't come down to what he's doing now. It's career longevity I'm considering is how he plays sustainable in a climate in 2-3 years from now. The assists, the rebounding, that part of the game is never going to change for him.
Yeah.
Him facilitating the offense, that's never going to change either. But he's decreased his demand on offense for scoring, right?
Yep.
What will that look like in 2 to 3 years? What will he look like in 2 to 3 years because of that too? And then he's notoriously known for not being a fitness guy. So what does 35-year-old James Harden look like? And is that someone you can have on the court playing extensive minutes or weighing that much on your on your payroll? So that's why I would consider it a little bit differently.
I feel
just one thing to roll back to, the Kyrie was going to be offered an extension.
Oh yes.
Because of the whole COVID thing.
No, you're actually you're correct on that. And I mean, it doesn't really make sense that Kyrie would ever leave or anything like that. So the only one that's kind of like, as we see, we're talking here is James Harden. But I wouldn't be too concerned about at least personally, I'm not too concerned about like, is his scoring game going to hold up? Because I mean, his game's always been like skill, and that's what we were talking about. Like when he's out of shape and he has a giant belly, he does not look good or anything like that. He's playing out there, he's destroying everybody still, just because like he doesn't really rely too much on athleticism. Of course, these guys are crazy athletic, but it's but then also too like. I guess I'm gonna take this one back because I was gonna say of like, think about guys like LeBron and all that, where what is he, 36 now, and he's still like an athletic god that he is and everything. But I was gonna say I take that back because LeBron, we see how much effort he puts to maintain his body and all this other stuff, and then as we just talked about, James Harden doesn't really do that. It comes in out of shape and everything. So, I mean, I think it, like you're saying, I can see it makes sense both sides. Just do a little bit shorter term. It's actually more flexibility for both teams because and if the Nets ever wanted to trade, let's say things happen and 2 years later they want to trade, having more flexibility on that contract always helps. So, yeah. Do you want to move on to the Donovan Mitchell stuff?
Yes. So recent reports, another Yahoo Sports publication on this one is Donovan Mitchell, an NBA scout, reported that he believes that the Jazz are one more first round exit away from Donovan Mitchell being a part of New York. And obviously, we know he's talking about the New York Knicks. Recently, he actually coming back from injury from I think he sustained a concussion and he was out for like up to 5 games. So seeing all of this conversation are starting up right now about where he might want to be, but also there was another report that showed that he, his family believes that he's a little bit bigger of a star or too big of a star for the the Salt Lake City market. So they believe that there's going to be a time where he needs to facilitate a trade out to a bigger market. And it's starting to leave breadcrumbs around the league that this time it's going to be the Knicks. What do you think about that, Brian?
So I also like offline. My initial thought was it already. Like, all right, we have another rumor of another star wanting to come to the New York Knicks. And at this point, I don't buy it. Until it actually happens, this happens all the time. It never actually ends up happening. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, there is like the ties and everything. So there's the Leon Rose and the CAA stuff. There's the Knicks have Utah's old assistant coach and Johnny Bryant as their assistant coach right now. That's like really close with Donovan Mitchell. They have all this stuff, but like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter like how close these relationships are. There's a lot of moving parts in order for a player to move. Utah is not going to trade Donovan Mitchell for nothing. So, if the Knicks ever would want to do this, let's just believe, yes, this is a possibility that's going to happen. The Knicks are going to have to trade literally everything they have in order to get Donovan Mitchell. And then now they have Donovan Mitchell, which is cool and all, but the rest of the team is completely empty. You have no more assets. So, like, that's where I'm always kind of leaning on during the situations. We talked about it with like Dame a year ago or something like that. It just usually just doesn't make sense to do one of these trades. I would love to see Donovan Mitchell in a Knicks jersey. He's an awesome player and all this. And it makes sense why he wants to move out of Utah because Utah doesn't have a ton of fans. And we'll talk a little bit more when it comes to all-star voting of how much fan votes that Utah players get. But like, yeah, I just don't really see it happen. So we had some technical difficulties. We fixed it now, but we're gonna just to pick up from where we were talking about Donovan Mitchell and talking about how Donovan Mitchell, there's the trade rumors and everything. My last closing thought that I wanted to bring up was mainly of like, where does Utah go from here? Because can they beat the Suns? Can they beat the Warriors? And if you think the answers to those questions are no, now what do you guys do? Because your window's closing, you're starting to lose assets, your assets are getting older, they're depreciating. Where do they go? Now, Jeff, I'll pass it on to you.
Yeah, no, I think that fits into something that we spoke about early on in our podcasting career, the mid market conundrum, right? Like that. This is a perfect example of it. Like it's like the weird time of deciding whether it makes sense to go all in and try to win, or if it makes sense to scale back and save money and get other assets that could be a good team, but not a championship team as of right now. And you know, it stuff like that when it starts happening puzzles you, right? Like as a fan, it puzzles you. But then when you remember that it is a business. The NBA is a business, and the owners are looking for ways to make it profitable. And sometimes having players that ultimately are great players, but just in the long run will not get you the value you need to raise the stakes of your team. They got to move forward or move away from them. And look at the Hawks. A similar situation is they're not giving up Trae Young, but they uh, they know that right now, like they can't compete. They won't compete the same way, and they just don't have the capital that these other teams that are competing have. So they have to move away from some players, bring in some other players, look at stuff a little bit differently. Would help from you know a deeper lined pocket when they can move away from players.
Yeah. It's kind of sad to see what's happening in Utah. Like, cause yeah, they're still actually really good. And just looking at the numbers that I've seen of like, as of now, they're still the number one offense in the NBA. But over the last 2 weeks, they're like the number 14th, and they're kind of dropping off a bit. Mike Conley was this last year when he was an All Star, and now Mike Conley's career is taking a little bit of a downturn. And I mean, the guy's still doing well. 14 points, 5 assists a game. Um, but it's just like after Donovan, after Rudy, who else does this team really have? I mean, Bogdanovich is doing pretty decently, but like Joe Ingles is having a down year, and it's kind of concerning. Of like all these other teams have insane amount of stars, and Utah is just kind of not there, and they just play really good team basketball, and it's like it kind of makes sense why this thought process of maybe Donovan Mitchell doesn't want to actually stay there long term. Maybe he wants to move somewhere else.
And I could see how being on that team could fuel um, the fact that probably his family feels like he's getting misrepresented, right? Because he just does not get the same looks. It's the similar situation I would say was happening with Anthony Davis. Is that we all knew how great of a player Anthony Davis is or was at that time, and but because he was in such a small market, he wasn't being exhibited all the time. So people weren't able to see all the time how great he was. So it kind of changed how you talked about him or thinking about him. I think that's similar to Donovan Mitchell. The fact that he's in Salt Lake City, he's just not getting the talk that he deserves. But he clearly is a leader. He's clearly a player that he says it all the time. Dwayne always says it now too. Is that he has a comparable game to what Dwayne Wade had, and if Dwayne Wade started in Salt Lake City, I guess same thing would have happened. You would hear about him, but it would never be the same as the conversations you have about these guys in bigger cities.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, and I mean, when you're in a bigger market, it does lead to a lot of opportunities to make a lot more money because of these sponsorships and everything. We don't Donovan Mitchell. We all know if Donovan Mitchell was in a bigger market, if he was in LA, New York, Miami, whatever else, you'd see him in commercials. You'd see him get all these treatments that everyone else is getting because he's at that level of talent. It's just that no one really cares about him too much because of where he plays. And unless that team actually start, I mean, I guess it's kind of even thinking about like, I guess it's kind of comparable to like the Spurs or like when the Spurs were really good 10 years ago or whatever. Every single year, it's like, oh, who's going to win the NBA championship? And everyone's like naming all these different teams. I mean, no one really ever brought up the Spurs, even though the Spurs were always right there. The Spurs were always like competing and one of the top three or so teams. It's just that no one's really going to talk about them because no one really cared too much about them. They're not super flashy. So kind of similar what we see there. I'm interested to see long term. I have zero hope or zero expectation that Donovan Mitchell will ever come to the Knicks. So that's where, keep the expectations low so I don't get disappointed.
Well, I'll add this last thing, and you take it for what it is. If you want to take it as it means something or it doesn't, but he does have New York ties, right? He does have New York roots. His dad is an executive for the New York Mets. Like he has his reasonings of why he wanted to be out east, right? But at the same time, I hear you. The rumor mill is going to keep on milling, so you take it with a grain of salt at this point. But it definitely has made great conversation, and pairing a guy like that onto the Knicks team, it might drastically change what's on the team, but having a player like that on the Knicks would definitely, in my mind, have residual effects that would lead them to being a good team.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we kind of saw a little bit last year of like when Julius Randle was playing well. Now we start hearing all this buzz. Now even some free agents are like, oh, maybe potentially there, and it's like winning kind of solves everything. If you start winning and you start doing pretty well, and you start being an attractive place for players to go, and it's never going to get solved if you're always tanking, and then unless you strike gold when during the draft. But the draft is even I think Sam Presti talked about it of like when he was doing, and is that Sam Presti who did the tanking stuff with Philly? Is that him or no?
Hinkie,
Sam Hinkie, yeah, sounds right. But yeah, when the Sixers were tanking, their thought process was like, the draft is a crapshoot. It's so like hit or miss. You never know. But the name of the game is get as many opportunities as possible to try to strike gold. Because if you do that, then you have a possibility. But like even look at them. Look how many top picks that they had, and look at the ones that actually worked out. You got Joel Embiid. Yeah, great. He's fantastic. And that's it. You lost on Nerlens Noel. You lost on Markelle Fultz, Ben Simmons. Now you can kind of see that kind of turn down. And I'm sure I'm missing somebody else, but like they missed a lot of time.
Little Okafor.
Yeah, Okafor. These are like either 1, 2, or 3 picks, and like the one that's here is Joel Embiid. So like it's so hard to build that way. So long-winded way of saying, I wouldn't be too opposed of it happening. It does make sense, but it always makes sense, and it never actually happens. So we'll see. You want to move on to CJ, or do you have anything else you want to end on?
No, I think we got everything on that topic. So, like I was saying, as the rumor mills keep on milling, we head on down to the Portland Trailblazers, a big player in our podcast, constantly talked about. But today we're talking about CJ McCollum, and I don't know if you've been under a rock, but there's a point guard, shooting guard, combo guard, what you want to call it. That is emerging on the Portland Trailblazers, and his name is Afrini Simmons. At the tender age of, I believe he's still just 20 years old, which is insane.
Yeah.
But he is going off this season, and he is showing that the Trailblazers, contrary to what I've said in the past, definitely made a good draft pick on him. Mm-hmm. And I believe he did it. He foregoed college and spent some time either in the G League or some developmental league for 1 year, and then came into the league. But he was drafted high because of that, because it was still unorthodox to go that route. We've obviously seen how that works now with Kuminga going from Ignite. And I think he was the 7th pick. So it is getting adopted more. But his emergence has led to now the Trailblazers rethinking their position on CJ McCollum. So for that, I know for me personally, how I feel about that, I always saw the emergence of Freeney or not. CJ's gone. There's just so much talk you can have about a player before you decide you got to let him go because it's not healthy for them on the court, off the court. But not only just that, for the locker room as well. Because to constantly hear all those trade rumors and going back and forth with it is not helping anyone. What do you think about that, Brian?
Yeah, I think it's kind of time to move on from CJ. And CJ, he's actually a very good player. The one problem with him, though, is that the injuries. And this is a constant thing that we keep talking about, you know. Players always getting injured, injury prone, stopping them from being their best. When he's healthy, like even this season right now, he's having a pretty decent season. It's just that he's already missing games as well. And it just already, we know the CJ and Damian Lillard experiment does not work. It's not enough to lead you to a championship. When those two guys play, they're very good. It's just that they're not enough, especially with how good some of these top teams in the West are, and even just in the entire NBA. And like you said, you have this really good backup that should be getting more playing time. And he actually has been getting a decent amount of playing time, but rather than being off the bench, like it'd be kind of nice to pair him up with Dame and see how that looks. The one concern about the CJ stuff is like, what's his value? Does anyone value very, very high? Because the only thing that there's two main rumors that I'm trying to base CJ's value off. There's the CJ for Ben Simmons kind of talk. And then, as you see, Sixers not really interested in that. So it's like, okay, a little bit lower. The next rumor that I see that's coming up is like the Pelicans are interested in offering Josh Hart and several draft picks. Is that really anything for like CJ? Like I don't know what they can get or what even the Blazers are trying to get. Are they trying to get more assets? Is that interesting to them? Are they trying to get more players? Are they trying to win? Tell me, Jeff.
So it's interesting that you brought that up because first, let me just do a direct quote from Mark Stein, him speaking about the recent development and saying what the opportunity of Damian Lillard being injured led to and why we're in this conundrum now. And then we can break it down in a little bit even further. So his direct quote is, when it was announced recently that Portland's Lillard was headed for an abdominal surgery, I remember a rival executive asking if I was ready for the Freeney Simmons audition. I really hadn't given it much thought, but Simmons sure was. The restricted free agent to be is averaging around 24 points a game, has made close to 5 3-pointers per game in January to spark some of the loudest speculation yet in the Pacific Northwest that the Trailblazers are finally ready to break up the Lillard and CJ McCollum partnership. That former team president, Neil O'Shea, considered sacred for so long to make room for re-up Simmons. So from what I gathered from there is that they were holding on to hope of CJ because of the man at the helm. It doesn't mean that everybody was on the same page with that. So I think ultimately it's not even that a Freeney, and it confirms what I was trying to say earlier, is that if Freeney goes off or not, CJ was a guy that was going to get moved. You just had someone that drafted him and was emotionally tied to that player and moving that player because he thought it was going to work. And that then gives way into, like you were mentioning, the Pelicans. I saw some reports of a potential three-way trade where you bring in Brandon Ingram into the trade, you bring in CJ McCollum into the trade, and then Sabonis as well into the trade. I don't have the exact details of like who goes where, but I think that is like a good elk like of players of where he's around or where his value is of like how when he's on the court, when he's healthy,
Yeah.
what he looks like. Sabonis has injury problems as well. So there's reasons why I would say he's more closer to Sabonis than he is Brandon Ingram. But
Yeah.
Brandon Ingram also has injury concerns as well too. So they're all three injury, I wouldn't say prone, but they have injury concerns in their career that does sideline them for more than 10 games in a season. So but I do like the three players being considered in that trade. Where they go, I don't know right now. But I would love to see a trade centered around those three players and make the money make sense.
Yeah, I kind of like it because exactly like you were saying, like I think CJ is on like the level of those three guys. And now I think whoever gets who, like you're saying, I think whoever gets CJ is kind of on the short end. And so you would like to see them get like a little bit more, if it's like even second round picks or whatever. But that's kind of interesting. I'd like to see where that happens. I'd like to see who's a team that like what it looks like at the end of the day. Like you're saying, like we don't know who goes where, like in this mock trade, but like just even thinking about it, like if CJ make sense on the Pacers? I don't know, because I'm thinking of like, all right, Pacers have Malcolm Brogdon and they have Chris Duarte. They probably want to keep those two guys together, and they have Karis LeVert too, but they're looking to trade Karis LeVert. And then maybe there's something there with like Harrison and CJ. I don't know. For the Pelicans, I guess it kind of makes sense if you bring in CJ because they don't really have too great of guards, and you like to pair someone up with Zion to help him a little bit better. Um, all interesting. A lot to think about there.
Definitely.
Okay, so trade deadline's coming up. I'm sure we're gonna talk more about the Blazers. I'm always so puzzled about what the Blazers are gonna do long term because it never makes sense to me. But they got some good young talent now. Finally, do you want to move on to the Knicks? Or no, not the Knicks. The
Wiggins.
Andrew Wiggins. Yes. I was jumping ahead.
Yes. So this Thursday, much like every season, there's a big reveal on Thursday night on TNT with the boys, Shaq, Charles, Kenny, and Ernie, as they reveal who are the starters for each coast. So this year, there was a lot of names that we expected on that list. Like the Joel Embiids of the world, the LeBron James of the world, the Kevin Durant's of the world, all guys that you expected to be on that list. But when we started looking at the West list, there was one glaring name that we saw left out, and there was someone else that was added onto that list. First thing I'll say about that person that was left off the list is it's kind of shocking because the last 3 years, actually last 2 years, this guy has been the odds-on favorite to win MVP. In the beginning of the season, it hasn't panned out that way, but to see like he's always considered for that in recent history, and he's not even a starter on the All-Star game, just shows you how much talent there is in the league. But it also asks you to beg to differ with the decision to add Andrew Wiggins as a starter on the Western Conference team. What do you think, Brian?
Oh man, it's kind of crazy. So this is another thing. We talked a little bit offline, and at first, my initial reaction was Andrew Wiggins, good player, having a great season, super efficient this season. You know, he brought up his 3-point percentage to like 40% this season. The Warriors are doing really well, so like I love him as an all-star, but as an all-star starter, doesn't feel necessarily right because like you mentioned, you look at all these names and it's like, someone here is an imposter. Someone here does not belong with the rest of them. And um and then as I looked more into it, now I kind of see why it makes sense. Because if you at first glance, it's like Andrew Wiggins over Devin Booker, Andrew Wiggins over Chris Paul, Andrew Wiggins over Luka. It's like, what's happening here? Then I realized the way they do the starters is kind of annoying in my opinion because they have it as you can only have 2 backcourt players. You can have 2 backcourt players and 3 frontcourt players in your All-Star game. And this is kind of how Andrew Wiggins ended up as an All-Star starter because you have a lot of injuries to your front court players this year. Paul George looks like he's going to be out for the season. He's started to look amazing, but he didn't really play too much. So he was out. Kawhi Leonard out for this entire season. He would have taken the spot easily. Anthony Davis been injured a lot. He's a front court player. He probably would have also taken this spot as well. And it's like there's this as well. There's so much to the story. As well, they kind of changed up how the All-Star voting actually works to make it towards where the fan votes actually matters more. And right before All-Star this voting happened, the Warriors announced a new global ambassador for the team. It's a K-pop star. His name is Bam Bam. This guy has like 10 million followers on Instagram. Or 15 million on Instagram, 10 million on Twitter. And he tweets out, and he's like, yeah, I'm the global, but he doesn't say this, but he's like, let's vote for Andrew Wiggins. He's having a fantastic year. And if you look at the numbers of the top 3 fan votes, which matters the most, there were LeBron James, 9 million votes from the fans. Nikola Jokic, 5 million votes from the fans. Andrew Wiggins is the next person, the third highest at 3.4 million. And it's like a lot of this definitely came from this K-pop guy, the guy playing well. And it's just, it's pretty crazy. So looking at it, it kind of makes sense. Jeff, what do you think?
I like that the NBA tried to think outside of the box this year with the whole hashtag voting as well. But I do think that there's ways of manipulation with that, and that's clearly being shown when you speak of the K-pop star Bam Bam taking head wings, and literally lifting a guy higher. Because if you actually look at that list, because I think we looked at the same article. You look at the list. The person that's on that list is Draymond Green. So it definitely did help having someone of that magnitude reaching out, saying, "Hey, retweet this, retweet so this person can go to the All-Star game." That helps a lot. But I think you're right. The biggest pull actually is the injuries. The injuries that are being sustained out west on the big men, just it goes to show why he wasn't a starter. I will say I am kind of confused why a guy like Carl wouldn't get it over him. And Carl has played well. They're a decent team this year. But if you run down the next 5 names, I think these are all guys I would choose over Andrew Wiggins. Green, Paul George, Rudy, Karl Towns, and then Anthony Davis. Those next 5 guys are all guys I would have chose over Andrew Wiggins as a starter. Probably could go 10 down and
Yeah.
still be still be guys I would choose over Andrew Wiggins as a starter. But you're right. The fact that the NBA is becoming more and more positionless is the way how they do this. In my mind, is still it kind of is still outdated.
Yeah.
Because then at this point, it should just be players. It should just be players. Don't limit it to front court, back court, because you're limiting with talent you can actually bring. Because a guy like Giannis is as big as someone in the front court, but his skill speaks to someone that's in the backcourt.
Yep.
LeBron, same thing. So those classifications don't make sense for players anymore. We've seen the age of 6'8", 6'9" point guards. I know Magic pioneered that, but it's something that happens in the league all the time now, and the voting should reflect that. At least in my mind, it should.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much took the words out of my mouth because I was gonna say like the same exact thing. It doesn't really make sense to have just 2 backcourt players because all these guys are so skilled. If anything, have 2. Don't even call it front court, but like 2 guys over. Even then, I was gonna say over 6'10", over 7 foot. Like so you don't have like 3 centers out there, sure, but like it doesn't even matter if you have 3 centers because those centers are so talented that like that could even work really well. And exactly what you're saying about Karl-Anthony Towns was the one guy I looked on the list that like I think deserved to really be there. Like you said, you have Draymond Green. Actually, I can see him too. You have Paul George. I'm fine with the injury stuff. Rudy's the only guy that's like, okay, he's actually not a power forward. Like he can't play a power forward. This guy only really plays one position. But then you got Karl-Anthony Towns that can do everything else. And like this is actually what I wanted to bring up about Rudy that I thought was pretty funny. About like I mentioned about, or we talked about Donovan Mitchell. His family doesn't think Salt Lake is big enough. And you look at like all these votes from all these other players of like Draymond Green, 2.4 million. Paul George, 2.8 million fan votes. Karl-Anthony Towns even 1.6 million votes. Rudy Gobert didn't even pass 1 million fan votes. Rudy Gobert was at 767,000 fan votes. It just shows you that it doesn't matter even how good a player is. In Utah, they're just not going to get the votes. They're not going to get the recognition of the media. It's pretty interesting. Of the media votes, they actually had Rudy Gobert as the next highest guy over, or aside from Jokic and LeBron, at 67 or 65 media votes. Andrew Wiggins had 4 media votes. Draymond Green had 20 media votes. And it's like, it's just so confusing. And then even the player votes, like both those guys had more votes than Andrew Wiggins. So that's where it is of like, I like that they're giving more weight towards the fans, but this is just kind of clear. Like Andrew Wiggins probably doesn't necessarily deserve to be a starter. Definitely an all-star, not a starter.
Exactly. I agree. There's nothing more to say to
that. Yeah. So you want to go on to the last main topic for today?
Yes. Cool. Yes. So, a team that we spoke about earlier in this podcast today, the New York Knicks are starting to feel out or touch base with a few organizations and see if they can bring in a point guard this season. One thing that led me to wanting to talk about this a little bit more too was the recent Cam Reddish trade, and Alan Hahn, big MSG guy, He's also on ESPN Radio New York. And he was talking earlier this week about how Cam Reddish is a nice to have, right? You do want to develop him, see him get better, but he's not solving the problem the Knicks have. And the Knicks' problem has been spanning silently over this organization for the last, honestly, arguably, you could say 20 years. The Knicks have been trying to find a point guard, and still, if they've had rare seasons where, yeah, the Raymond Felton years or the Jason Kidd years, both guys outside of their prime, even if they show to be functional, can help this team be a good team. But Knicks just can't get it right with point guards for some reason. So now they're looking into a few players that I think are very interesting, and they're kind of rekindling a previous interest and seeing where that goes. So I want to see Brian's raw emotion on that one. So I'm going to leave that second person for when we get there. But Jalen Brunson is the first point guard that they're reaching out to the Mavs about and trying to see if he fits, if they can make something work and make him a fit in New York. What do you think about that, Brian?
Oh man, as you're doing that intro, it made my stomach sick of like just thinking about, and I've even talked about this in earlier episodes, especially even when they got Kemba. I was like, oh man, Kemba is the best point guard we've had since all these other guys, like you say, Raymond Felton, who I actually hated watching. I didn't think he was very good. Jason Kidd, who was like 40 years old at the time when he was playing on the Knicks. And it's like, these are the recent names that they've had in the last even just 10 years. And it's insane to think about. But to touch on Jalen Brunson, I like Jalen Brunson. I think he's actually a very good player. My kind of only thoughts about it is there's two main ones. There's Jalen Brunson is a unrestricted free agent this season, at the end of the season. So trading for him now to give up assets for somebody that you can just outright sign in the offseason kind of feels bad, in my opinion. Like, it doesn't really feel great. I understand why you do it, because if you trade for him now, that means when you sign him during the offseason, you can use his bird rights, and then it helps with flexibility and all that other stuff. So there's that. Like, I'd like to see it. But I think, Jeff, like, I think you would agree too. Jalen Brunson is not a top 10, even top 15 starting caliber point guard. Is he a good point guard? Yes. Could he be a decent starting point guard? I actually really do think so. But like, you look at all these top teams, their starting point guards are like pretty next level compared to what Jalen Brunson can bring. I think even just like looking at like what Jalen Brunson is and comparing like even just kind of play style and all that other stuff, like my closest thing is like a worse Fred VanVleet. That's what you kind of get with Jalen Brunson. What do you think?
I agree. I think that's probably a great comparison. That's not even probably. It is a great comparison to bring up. He's the greater value. Fred VanVleet. So I agree. My thing with Jalen Brunson, and we talked about it, I think, last week, is the money that he wants. How are we going to make that work? Or does the Knicks want to make that work first? Second, it does go to, I think I'm going to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that is he's obviously had an increased role this season where he's getting up to 32 minutes now and averaging around 16 points. But when he's calling the shots, what is he going to look like? What is he truly going to look like?
Yeah.
And how can that change? Because, you know, he has to hold back the reins a little bit because he's still playing with Luka. So if given the keys to the car, how does he drive it? I want to see that. And I think that the Knicks do present a perfect situation, destination for him to have that chance. Will we ultimately see that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But do I like the idea of it? I do like the idea of it. If they could talk him down on the money per year, a little bit, but
Because
who
what
knows?
he wants at the end of the day, like money wise, like we're talking about, greater value Fred VanVleet. He actually wants kind of money pretty close to Fred VanVleet, and it's like I don't know if I could give him that much. And at the same time, too, if you trade for him, what are you giving up? Like a lot of teams actually have a decent amount of interest in Jalen Brunson because, well, one, this free agency class coming up, we can get into it in a later episode. Pretty awful. There's really nobody available. So it is really not like much you can do there. So you look at someone like Jalen Brunson. There's a reason why he's asking for so much money because who else would you give any money to? Not really anyone else. And it's also kind of making this pretty competitive because like you see a ton of reports out there that like the Pistons are calling about Jalen Brunson. A bunch of other teams are calling about Jalen Brunson. And he's the only, like we talk about, Knicks are looking for a point guard. I'm interested to see who your other guy is because I actually don't know. But like other than Jalen Brunson, there's really not a lot of available point guards out there. Dennis Schroeder, like there's like no one out there, and it's so bad right now. It's been bad for the Knicks for the past decade, and yet there's still no point guard they can get. The best point guard they probably had over that time is like the 20 games that they had Chauncey Billups before they used their amnesty on him. God. The one amnesty that you have, you use it on probably the best talented point guard you have. It's so bad.
Yeah, and I forgot about him. I honestly did forget about Chauncey because when he came in, he looked good as well with Carmelo coming in at the same time. And honestly, we've talked about this in the past too. I don't remember if it was offline or on the pod. Is that the biggest disservice that happened in Carmelo's career is that he could never have a consistent point guard. The guy was a scorer, and everyone knew he was a scorer. With asking him to be something else is almost preposterous, So why not put the right pieces around him to get the most out of him? And they never did. But the next person that I'm going to talk about, I have to give a little bit of context back. Oh, wait, actually, before we go to that, I did look up the salary cap rules, and you're right. It is leading towards Jalen Brunson's going to get a big payday because there's provisions around the salary cap where I believe it's up to 80 or 90% of your salary cap. I mean, of your cap that you have open in that off season has to be filled up.
Yep.
So you can't just like say, well, I have 30 mil over. I have 30 mil and I'm just going to get two guys. We're going to sign them to 5-year deals and only use 10. So we could just take that into next year. The NBA doesn't allow that. You had to get really close to using up every one of those dollars. And we've seen in the past where because of rules like that, we've seen people like I remember in 2016 when we had the last TV deal, there was guys that once you got away from the Kevin Durant's and everything of the world, there was guys that did not warranted the contract that they got, but they had to give the money to someone. Yeah. I remember seeing the Nets offer contracts to Tyler Johnson, contracts to Otto Porter. These are all players that 5 years, it's only been 5 years. If they actually got those players, they're not doing anything for the team because they're nowhere. Well, Otto Porter's with the Warriors right now, but Johnson, I don't know where he's at in the league. He was with the Nets last year,
Yeah.
ironically, but it, it's just leading towards another season like that. And like you said, Brunson might be up for a big payday because of that, but it could suck for him because people are going to undervalue.
Yep.
But yes, so now leading into the next person that I want to talk about, just a little bit of context before that, is that we got to look into recent reports that are saying that the Knicks are actually open. Ian Begley, your boy Ian Begley, said that the Knicks aren't actively looking for a suitor to get Julius Randle, but they're not shutting the door on the idea of trading him. So that's one thing that I'm keeping in mind before I bring up this next name. But a reported or a mock trade that looks very interesting, and I think if done, ultimately makes the Knicks a lot better right now in my mind, is with the Timberwolves. And that trade would be to move Julius Randle to the Timberwolves and bring back D'Angelo Russell. Reason why I say I like this one, it gives way for a few things. You move away from, in this proposed trade, you would move away from Walker. So he would move to the T Wolves. You would bring in Russell, already an influx in talent at this stage in his career. Injury prone is the one thing that leaves me going, but one thing that I really do like about this trade is that it gives Obi Toppin that opportunity to finally be a part of the starting role. Obviously, we've talked about it before. Julius Randle is becoming notorious for his attitude and his spats out there. And a guy like Obi Thompson, Obi Toppin is actually a galvanizer of men in the sense, like, I'm not saying he's the leader, but he knows how to get the crowd going. Yep. He knows how to get his team going. So having someone like that play longer than having someone like Julius Randle, who right now is just not in a good place, where he is almost every week now, there's something with his, like you said, body language that is just throwing people off. Recent report about the fan that Julius Randle got ejected for heckling. You have the when Fournier touched him and then he like brushed him off. There's just too much piling up right now, or you'd allow it for it to get even worse at this point. And I think it only makes sense to just get rid of him now while he still has some value, and you don't take a page out of the Sixers playbook and wait it out.
Yeah, I think so. This is actually very interesting. There's a lot that I want to cover. I want to touch on those last points that you brought up, though, of like, well, one, I'm 100%. I'm ready to pack Julius Randle's bags myself. I am so fed up with him at the moment. It is so sad. And like you're saying, man, if they traded him last season, they could have gotten a decent amount for Julius Randle. Like, because he was having such a good year. It's just that no one would ever imagine he'd regress this bad. Even looking at his numbers, they're even bad. They're even worse than that first year that he had here where everyone hated him. They're even worse in there. And it's just like, it's so sad. I actually do like him in Minnesota, especially with Karl Anthony Towns, because we talked about it a little bit during the offseason of like, there was that one video where like Julius Randle and Karl Anthony Towns are like, hyping each other up and saying like how much they'd love to play with each other one day and they'd love to do all this other stuff. I like that fit. I'm personally not even the biggest D'Angelo Russell fan, but like honestly, like I don't really see too much value from Julius Randle at the moment. It's kind of like you're saying, similar to like a Ben Simmons kind of thing of Ben Simmons. The idea of like when he's at his best is fantastic. And if you think about last year of Julius Randle at his best, is like that's a guy that could really help a team. Not a number one option, but a really solid number two option. Even number three option is even better. Because if he goes to Minnesota, he's the number three option. You got Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and then Julius Randle. That's pretty intriguing to me. D'Angelo Russell with this Knicks team, give some room for Obi Toppin. I like it. I do it. I honestly, I'm so sick and tired of Randall. I do it.
The one thing that I like about it on the Russell side of thing is that the Knicks have a similar situation that he walked into when he was on the Nets, right? And they have a coach with a similar type of mindset that Kenny Atkinson had when Russell was added to that team. And why I think he got to the level of play that he had is that he put the ball in his hands and he allowed for his playmaker to make decisions. Kenny Atkinson being as a player, being a point guard of mine too, he knew to do that. From track record, you see the same thing with Tom Thibodeau, is that he allows for his point guards to control the game. Obviously, he's going to ask more out of him on the defensive side of things, but I've seen his defensive game has improved over what it was early in his career, right? And he's a big guard. He's not a small guard. He's around 6'5". He has a solid length on him to bully a couple point guards if you need to. But not only that, I think it's with him, with Cam, and then now with Barrett, there's a lot of lineups interchangeable that you could be interested.
Yeah.
That will be interesting that you could do with those three players. Not only that, the complete package that was said in this proposed trade scenario was D'Angelo Russell, Josh Okogie, and then a first-round pick for exchange for Randall and Kemba Walker. Josh Okogie, I like his defense. I like what he's not an offensive mastermind, but he definitely provides a little bit of size on the wing because Evan Fournier, as much as he is good on the offensive side, he doesn't provide the defensive aspect that you need. So plugging him in at certain points, clutch times and during the game where you need a little bit more defense. You already got offense coming from Barrett now, Cam, and even if you want to go down that route, D'Angelo on the court at that same time. And then you can play a real small team. I like the thought of like a crunch time lineup of Obi Toppin. Honestly, I think foul wise, if they're not gonna hack a Mitchell, but probably Mitchell at the 5, Kogi at the 4. Throw in Barrett, throw in Cam, and then throw in D'Angelo. That sounds like a pretty decent, like, close out the game type of. You have the offense, you have the defensive prowess. You just need a couple guys with defense to anchor it for it to work. And if those two guys are anchoring it, those guys are going to fall into place. Those other three guys, and Barrett's not a bad defender. So yeah.
No, it definitely could work. I like the first round pick being added in there. I like getting rid of Kemba as much as we talked about it before. As much as I like Kemba, man, I looked at his numbers. He's having in his 11-year career so far, this is his worst season since his rookie season. Even like last season, he was pretty decent. Even though he only played 43 games, he still was averaging like 19 points. He was still shooting well, still doing everything else. Like he looked like Kemba Walker. This season, man, other than those 4 games after he was benched, like he's been terrible again. He's literally went back to the same Kemba Walker that we saw at the beginning of the year, where it's like he just hurts the team. I think it's pretty clear that the team wants to trade him, and like that's the main reason. Like if you bench him now, then you're kind of telling the rest of the league like he can't even play here. But if you just keep playing him, then I don't know. We'll see. I like it. I'd do it. I think that'd be so much more fun to watch that team like with D'Angelo Russell than Julius Randle right now. Because you mentioned too of like all the stuff that Julius Randle is doing on the court with his body language, the stuff with the fan. What the fan was saying was like, it was just something along the lines like, oh, you got like all this money and you're complaining and giving thumbs down to fans. Like, why are you doing this? And like, there's so many pictures over these last like couple games for the Knicks of you have Julius Randle. There's a timeout huddle, and Julius Randle is standing by like the free throw line versus next to the sideline with the rest of his team. There's times where players will fall down to the floor, and Julius Randle is the closest person to that floor. You know, everyone always goes to pick up the person that fell down, and immediately Julius Randle turns his back away. All this stuff, never hustling, never. The guy is completely mentally checked out. I think he is just completely checked out and done with his team. Yeah, it's so bad. He's not even showing up to press conferences anymore. The Knicks are not making him available, which leads him to getting fined and all this other stuff. It is a complete mess this season. And I would like that. I'm honestly more intrigued by that than getting Jalen Brunson. I'm kind of more intrigued with the D'Angelo Russell, mainly because just get Julius Randle off this team. I don't care what it takes. Get him out of here. It's so bad.
No,
Yeah.
I really do feel like he needs a change in scenario at this point. But I guess the bigger question that comes from this, and it's the question that's always asked, right? But I always like to think that questions like these are just asked to add fuel fire to a narrative. But it is time to start thinking about it. What makes it so hard for a superstar to want to be on the Knicks? Granted, I'll give you this. Julius Randle, in my mind, I've never surmised him to being a superstar. Even last year in a good season,
I agree.
said he was a star. But because of where he was going to be relegated to being a superstar.
Yep.
You know? And now I think he's facing the consequences of that. And he's being negatively impacted by it. And he's seeing, I can't escape this. Like, I think there's a solace in that. Like, if you were in somewhere like Salt Lake City where you could escape it,
yep.
And you could just not worry about what the fans say once you get home. But Julius Randle is probably in his car. He's in the train. He's getting food. He's getting groceries. He's going to the gym. Like, everywhere he goes, there's going to be someone either that heckles him, ask him a question about the game, ask him about why, like, so much money, why you're getting paid so much to do this. Like, He definitely is a lot.
Yeah, it's honestly, to be a star in New York, it takes a special type of person. And like, it's exactly what we're saying here. Like, Julius Randle is kind of not that guy. It's like when they were winning last season, you could tell how happy he was and how he was playing. And honestly, it doesn't even matter. And just even listening to Knicks fans, even looking at their reactions to like even Obi Toppin, who he has bad games. The guy is not really like, he's not even, in my opinion, close to a star at the moment. He's not a star or anything like that. But Knicks fans are cheering his name. Why? because the guy hustles on every single play. Knicks fans cheer if you just hustle. And this guy has just a terrible attitude, and like you can miss every shot. But if you're not hustling, you're not doing all this stuff, and you're pouting all the time, then people are going to get upset at you. And it definitely got to the point where like Julius Randle is mentally gone and checked out from the team. He wants out. And even looking at like a player like RJ Barrett in the beginning of the season, RJ Barrett looked awful. He did not look good. He could not buy a bucket. He could not do anything. And fans were getting on him. But a little bit, nothing crazy, because he actually still always hustled on defense. Now he's playing good again, and everything is cool. And like he never really waver too much, but you can tell like Julius Randle is not the type of guy that like you start giving him negative attention and all that, then he just kind of shuts down. And that's just not a player that can succeed in New York long term, as we see, because he succeeded last season when he was good, but this season it's terrible. It's so bad. I'd agree. Like he was never really like a superstar or anything like that. It's kind of similar to what you see with like Kristaps Porzingis, of like the guy was overhyped because he was in New York. I watched every single game. I saw how inefficient he was, and I wasn't a huge fan, but I was like, I know everyone loves him. Trade him while he's hot. Trading him for Dennis Smith Jr. and DeAndre Jordan and like first round picks. Oh, it's so bad, dude. It's so bad. All right, I can't think about this anymore. Is there anything else you want to touch?
We won't relive the bad moments. No more.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we move on to the weekly roundup real quick?
I think we got everything on that.
Cool. So weekly roundup. There's a lot of stuff happening. Don't want to cover everything, but just want to bring light, and like we can lightly touch on some of these things. So, one, biggest news that happened this week. The Kings been a huge name in the Ben Simmons race. We've talked about it since the offseason that like where's probably the best place he can go? It has to be the Kings. He wants to be in LA. He wants to do all this stuff. And like that would be the best spot. The Kings are done. The Kings are done with Philly. They're dropping out of the trade talks for Ben Simmons, mainly because the Kings believe the asking price from the Sixers is unreasonable. Now, Jeff, what do you think about this situation?
I 100% agree. I've been saying it since when we first started talking about this being a possibility, is that Daryl Morey thinks that he has more here than he really does, and he thinks that he's the smartest man in the world. That's a problem. That's a problem as a GM. I don't care how brilliant you think he is, how great his team construction has been in the past. Someone that's a GM that thinks that way is always going to more likely than not put you in a bad situation. And granted, it's funny because Daryl Morey, when he was on the Rockets, he was ready to pull the trigger whenever. Apparently, he's holding off. And who knows why he's held off this long. So, and then honestly, let's be honest too, Ben Simmons does not fit the realm of players that Daryl Morey likes. Like, Daryl Morey is all about, when he was on the Rockets, was so much about scoring efficiency and how Harden was the most efficient guy since Jordan. And for him to have a guy that is clearly the opposite of efficient on the offensive side of the game, and he's telling you that he has equal or better value than to get James Harden in return, or to get possibly 3-4 assets from the King and dump a bad contract. Like, what are we talking about, man? Like, what are we really talking about right now? It just doesn't make any sense. And I don't like it. I don't like the whole situation that he's giving, and he's making life for every player on that team, on the Sixers team, a lot harder because they have to live with this each and every day.
Yeah, it's It's pretty bad, and you can see of like there was another report of where you can see first the type of value that the Sixers want because they offered the Hawks, which the Hawks rejected. The trade is for Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris. The things that the Sixers do not want. The Sixers' $60 million trash. They wanted from the Hawks John Collins, Bogdan Bogdanovic, and 3 first round picks. That's where they're trying to get for those $60 million. And it's like, maybe if it was even John Collins and Bogdan. Now you're trying to add like 3 first round picks. You're trying to do all this stuff, trying to grab so much from like, honestly, if you wanted to right now, today, get rid of Tobias Harris, you have to attach first round picks to get rid of him. That's just how it goes. What do you think? What do you think about that?
It's crazy because, like, when you really look at it, the implied risk, or not implied risk, the implied leverage is showing that it's the Sixers have it, right? Because they have a 3-year contract with Simmons. They don't have to do anything, right? But the real leverage is on Ben Simmons' side. And the further and further we go into the season, it's going to negatively impact his bank account, but it's going to just give him more and more leverage because he's standing his ground, right? And it seems like they're going to every one of these trades not thinking about that, not thinking that the team that's trading for Ben Simmons is not thinking about that either. It's like they think that this is such a commodity that we're giving to you that you should be begging us for not asking for more. Like you should be kissing the feet, our feet right now because we didn't ask for more from you. But that's not the scenario right now. That's not the situation that they have right now because of that. They've done things that led to it being this bad, and now you can't just expect GMs, presidents of basketball operations, to just blindly think, well, it's still Ben Simmons, though. Like, that's not how anyone's going to react to this.
Yeah, it's so bad. It's we can't look away, and oh man, we're gonna talk about it again next week. Next, real quick, the Kings, now that they're out of the Ben Simmons race, it looks like they are in the Jeremy Grant race now, and maybe the Kings might look for like a little Julius Randle. They're looking like they want a power forward. They want someone else to pair with Fox. Maybe there's something there too, but that's just my little flavor there. But yeah, there's Jeremy Grant. There's also for the Lakers, they reached out to the Kings about Buddy Hield, and I just think it's hilarious because they decided not to get Buddy Hield this last off season and go for Westbrook, who now they're trying to get rid of. And it's just, oh man, that's such a mess. What do you think there, Jeff?
I think you left out the biggest part of that report.
Oh,
is that it was a deal that's centered around our good friend THT. If I'm the Kings general manager, I would take that as an insult and have to delete Rob Pelinka's number from my phone from that point on. Because honestly, like, it's just getting more ridiculous how the Knicks are. The Lakers are trying to spin this narrative of THT as a serviceable player, our asset ready to be moved. Granted, a lot of people believed in his upside when he first got into the league, but when we're 3 years in and you're still not actualizing it, and you are getting increased minutes and moments to play with one of the best players in the league, and you're still not showing it, I don't think it's going to show when you go to the King. So it's mind-blowing that they keep on trying to push this narrative. And I don't know. I don't think there's anyone that's going to pull the trigger on that. I'm not saying that THT's career is over.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that THT's career, as thought by LeBron James to have been the next big thing, it's not something that I think is going to actually happen.
And this THT stuff is like, it's my favorite thing. It's my favorite thing next to Ben Simmons about that we're going to see reports on, until trade deadline at least. Um, Next, a couple names that I thought were interesting that teams are calling about. So one, teams are calling the Spurs about DeJounte Murray to see if he's available. DeJounte Murray should be an all-star this season. I'm very interested to see there what happens. Teams are calling the Knicks about Emmanuel quickly, even though the Knicks have shut down all those conversations. It keeps happening. And then lastly, the teams are calling the Nets about Joe Harris, Nick Claxton, and Jeff, your favorite guy, Bruce Brown. Any of those you want to touch on?
So I have seen reports about that as well. I think it is one of those players, possibly two, are going to be packaged together and used with the trade exception that the Nets received over the summer for the Spencer Dinwiddie deal. They can get someone that makes sense. But going through the list of guys that would possibly be available for that type of exception, which would be around 10, 11 mil, not a lot of like earth-shattering players, but a few guys that look like, hey, maybe on a different team could look a little bit better or are allowed to be a little bit more comfortable to fit in. There was guys like Jeremy Lamb, Thomas Saransky, etc. I can't remember all the other names, but those were some of the guys that fit into that value spot of that 10 to 11 mil trade exception. But honestly, I think, and I'm gonna have to shout out another podcast, the Glue Guys, which is a Brooklyn Nets based podcast, where they were talking about potential of like pairing together Nick Claxton and Joe Harris in a trade. I think that nets you a 20 mil type guy, but who fits in that 20 mil like range that would fit on the Nets? I'm not one to give up on Joe Harris right now. Honestly, kind of would want. I'm leaning to saying that about Claxton, but I still think that you could move a guy like Claxton, but Joe Harris is not something that you easily come by. So moving him would make things a lot difficult, especially when you have a team right now that just does not have the shooting. And it directly affected. He's directly affected the Nets from being the best 3-point field goal percentage team to one of the worst. So his value there is shown. It makes sense, and I wouldn't give up on someone like that right
now. Quick question: do you know when Joe Harris is supposed to come back from his injury?
So, much like any injury with the Nets, there's a lot of ambiguity. There's never really timetables. There's never really a clear, thought out like process of understanding what's going on. And that's what another funny thing is to tie that into is why we never really get actual real news about the Nets, even when it's rumor mill stuff. Yeah. Because the only way it gets out is, we've talked in the past, is if it's coming from Sean Marks, it's going to go to Woj, right?
Yep.
So there's not really a lot of news coming out from the team, and you just don't really know. Last I've heard, Steve Nash reported that he did in early January have a setback, but he's progressing. The timetable was supposed to be that post All-Star break, he should be looking to come back. So I'm thinking it's going to be around that time.
Okay, so not too far out. I mean, he has been out for pretty much most of the season. So that sounds, depending on like what the injury actually was and everything, like it sounds about right. Next, there was the Wizards are actually open to trading the guy they just signed, the guy you just brought up, Spencer Dinwiddie, because he's not really meshing too well with Bradley Beal. Any thoughts there?
No brainer. I don't know. I have Bradley Beal in my mind as like one of the type of guys that's like a Russell Westbrook. Ironically, they played together, where they're better off by themselves than they are with a team that has other great players or other players that fit what they're trying to do. Because it's just the way how they play, they demand so much. Their usages are high,
Mhm.
and they play a lot of hero ball. So you see that when Westbrook is alone, it works. Works for 45 wins, 50 wins, stuff like that, right? You've seen that with Beal as well, that it can work. Also, same range, probably slightly a little bit lower in winning percentage, but long term, it doesn't solve anything, and it really comes down to an ego thing. Those type of players don't just wake up the next day and change how they play to make sure someone feels comfortable playing
Yeah.
with them. So it's a little bit of, before you even open it up to trading, why don't you open the door to Bradley Beal thinking a little bit outside of the box about how he wants to play, what Spencer did when he didn't make it work, you know?
Yeah. Nah, I think you well said there. Let's move on to our last weekly roundup. So it's about John Collins. So John Collins has been reported to being available, open for trades. And one team contacted by Atlanta regarding Collins was told Bleacher Report that the Hawks were only seeking a first round pick and a starting caliber player in exchange for John Collins, which actually kind of surprised me. John Collins is only 24. I didn't know he was that young. But other teams also believe that the Hawks could draw an even higher return. Jeremy Grant has been frequently mentioned as a primary trade target for Atlanta, and that Atlanta's also been calling San Antonio about Derek White. So, Jeff, what do you think about this John Collins situation?
If I'm John Collins, I'm getting a little upset because it's kind of hard having to leave ATL to possibly go to San Antonio or Detroit. But on a serious note, I uh, I feel that that's good value. That's right around where I think his value is. Ironically, I think his value right now, currently, not talent wise, but his value is higher than what the Ben Simmons value is.
Yeah,
So that's why he would be able to garner something like that. I think there's a way where they pull in, because what I would love for them to see them do if they do move away from John Collins is you bring in a veteran, bring in someone that knows his way around the block, to help out with this team, because this team is very young.
yep,
I know they've moved a lot of pieces that made them extremely young, but they still are young. They still are very young. So if they could get a veteran in the room, one that's a starter, um, it makes sense. You know who I would think they should reach out to, and this might be a side deal. It might not be something with John Collins, but bringing in a guy like Hayward onto the team like the Hawks, bring him back to the Hawks, is like someone that fits what they're doing right now and getting the ship righted for a lot of young guys that don't understand Like, yes, I know we just made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year,
Mhm.
but there's some growing up that we still need to do, and he can help with that in my mind.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how much like Atlanta is shopping John Collins. I mean, they just gave him a pretty big extension this offseason. I think it was 5 years, 125 mil. They gave and like John Collins has openly said multiple times this season, like Atlanta is where I want to be. This is where I want to stay. And even like the Hawks struggle. I don't really think it's John Collins' fault. I think it's a lot of um, just the fact, and this is what we saw last season with them. They just have a lot of injuries all the time. All the time, they have a lot of their young players and their one of their best players be like always getting hurt. And like right now, over the last like week or two, Atlanta has actually been playing pretty decently well and been looking a lot better. So it's kind of interesting that like he's the guy that they want to trade, and I think he, like you mentioned too, very fair valued. Um, so it's kind of funny of like you can see how fair Atlanta is and the value of John Collins versus Atlanta wanted John Collins, Bogdanovich, who's also very pretty good. You have 3 first-round picks for Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris. Like that was what what Philly wanted versus like that's one side is pretty realistic, other one is not even close.
And I don't I don't blame the Hawks for saying no on that one.
Yeah.
Even though I think that I could see a way where Ben Simmons and Trey Young and even Tobias Harris works, right?
Yeah.
But I still uh, would not do it. I still
Yeah.
wouldn't do it.
I agree.
But it's in line if you're in line for like just comparing what you have of value, like you mentioned. It wasn't the right place, not the right time. If this was a trade that was proposed during the off season, I think it would have gotten done because we did not have the bad taste that we have about Tobias Harris
Yeah.
this season going on. Now we do, and then we have the Ben Simmons to add on to it. Makes it a lot worse of a scenario for this team. So digressing off of that, getting back into like what's happening up top for the Hawks, why I think this is starting to happen, and I lightly talked about it with the mid-market conundrum. Talked about it in the past about certain owner groups and how they play a part in decision making, and directly in this situation, it is a it is kind of a sell off for the team
Yeah.
because they need to reinvest the money into other parts of the business. And best way for them to do this right now, or they see themselves doing this, is getting rid of these young talents and getting more proven veteran talent back. Granted, that last trade for Cam Reddish was not that, but I don't think they're going to get that. I would love for them to get that, but I don't think they will find that when they trade these pieces. And it might be something that they regret doing or taking this road, but I know financial implications decide what these teams typically are going to do. Give an example, this deep Nets history right here is Nets in 2003. They always joke about this. Is Kyle Korver was traded for a copy machine because the Nets had no money. They had no
Yeah.
money, and they were picking going even into the next season. Because they went from title contenders to just a playoff contender, right? Is they allowed players that they should have re-signed and keep like the Kenny Martins of the world. They just did not have the money, the capital to keep those type of players, and they let them walk. And because of that, it took them right out of contention. This is what I'm starting to see or feel about this Hawks team right now. is that they are pricing themselves out of contention, and it might be they might regret it because it may be the reason why later in his career Trey might say I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy of like what you're bringing up there of the Hawks aren't actually that far from contention, and they actually have a lot of assets to go like all in and like be right there as one of the top 5 or so teams in the NBA. Um, but instead, they're like kind of doing these money moves now, and it's really sad to see that, like you're saying, like if they don't see themselves winning right now, then they're just kind of like let's blow it up. Not maybe it's not necessarily blow it up, but like let's save some dollars, and
Yeah.
that is sad to see. I am intrigued to see like what happens next with John Collins. Does he actually get traded? I'm kind of feeling like there's probably like I want to say like a 40% chance John Collins gets traded. I don't know. Are you higher than that, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I really don't think. I think I'm probably lower on that. But I don't think that they're going to find what they want out of it.
Yeah.
Granted, Jeremy Grant probably is the best option of like what they're looking for, but is that still? I still don't think that's like veteran level of what I was
Yeah.
wanting for that team. But I can see how an infusion of talent in a different way could lead them to making a playoff push, But I don't know. I don't think that the value you're giving up, John Collins is a great player to have, and giving him up for Jeremy Grant kind of doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan. What I do like it for the Hawks is like Jeremy Grant is actually a very good defender. And the Hawks, their biggest struggle is defense. So being able to exchange that with John Collins kind of sounds a little bit nice, but it still doesn't feel 100% right. I don't know. I'm not too crazy about it.
Me neither.
Yeah. Well, um, cool. I thought this was a lot of fun. I thought it was a lot of fun here. Um, Jeff, is there anything you want to say before we close out?
Yeah. So we're pulling in closer and closer to that trade deadline. I can't wait till when we have that episode. It's not gonna be this one, the next one, right? It's gonna be
Not the next, the following.
So, like, I can't wait to unpack on all of the trades. I honestly, offline, I told Brian this. I think this might be most busy trade deadline we've seen in recent future recent history, because we have just there's no definitive contender in my mind right now in the league. Nets have their issues, Warriors have their issues, Suns have their issues. Suns probably have the least issues, it looks like right now, to be honest. But everyone else after that too, there's a number of teams I could see like making a run and winning a championship this year. So because of that, I think teams are going to be aggressive in trying to pair stuff together and get what they want in this situation this year. And that should be very, very exciting to see and talk about.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy you just brought up it's going to be in 2 weeks that we talk about it, and like that's going to be episode 20. It'll be episode 20, the trade deadline talk, and like, hey, we've been doing it for this long, like 20 weeks. That's pretty awesome.
Dime show.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought this was really fun. A lot of great things we touched on here. We should have actually touched on this in the beginning of the episode, but I'll probably bring it up again for next episode. For all the listeners, we are moving our recording time to Saturday because we were doing it on Thursday nights, and some calendars issues that we're running into. So we thought Saturday mornings we're going to be able to be a lot more consistent. And then that also is going to lead us to be a lot more consistent and when we actually upload the episode. So as of now, the plan is Monday mornings. So we'll see how that actually unfolds. But that's the plan for now. Keep everyone updated on what we decide to change. And then, like I said, whoever made it to this point of the episode, thank you. You actually get to listen to this announcement. But for next time, we'll put it in the beginning. Yeah, this is really awesome. This was episode 18.
Peace.